She stood alone in a dark cabin on a mountain. A rifle she had never fired pressed against her shoulder, a wolfhound snarling at her feet. On the other side of the door, two men had come to finish blinding the woman she was protecting. She was 23 years old. She weighed 110 pounds, and she was the only thing standing between a dying woman and the men who wanted her dead. This is the story of Clara Whitmore, the mail-order bride nobody wanted, the healer nobody believed, and the smallest woman on the biggest mountain in Texas. Now let's begin. She stepped off the stagecoach into nothing. No husband waiting, no house in sight, just dust and silence, and the echo of 20 women crying somewhere behind her, their voices still hanging in the hot Texas air like smoke from a fired gun. The letter had promised a home. The letter had lied. Clara Whitmore stood on the boardwalk of Ridgewater, Texas, with a leather trunk in one hand and a worn saddlebag clutched against her chest with the other. Inside the saddlebag was her grandmother's journal. It was the only thing of value she owned in the world. It smelled of dried lavender and wood smoke in the hands of a dead woman who had loved her, and it was worth more than everything else Clara had ever touched combined. She was 23 years old. She weighed 110 pounds. Her navy blue traveling dress was dusty from 6 days of roads that had rattled her bones loose from their sockets. Her honey blonde hair was escaping its pins in long, damp strands that stuck to her neck. Her boots, the only pair she owned, had a crack in the left sole that let in water when it rained. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman with nothing, standing at the edge of nowhere, hoping that nowhere would be enough. Before we go on, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. I share new frontier stories every week. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Ridgewater, Texas was not a kind town. It sat in the brown crease between two ridges of hill country, a cluster of false-fronted buildings and sun-bleached wood that looked like it had been dropped from the sky and forgotten. The saloon was the biggest structure on Main Street. The church was the smallest. That told you everything you needed to know about priorities. Clara had arrived 30 minutes too late to witness the spectacle, but the whole town was still buzzing about it. Mrs. Adelaide Pemberton, the boarding house owner, stood in her doorway with her arms crossed and her mouth twisted into the permanent scowl of a woman who had been disappointed by life so many times she had made disappointment into a hobby. "You lost, honey, Mrs." Pemberton looked Clara up and down the way a butcher looks at a cut of meat he is not planning to buy. "Stage to San Antonio does not come back through until Thursday." "I am not going to San Antonio." Clara kept her voice steady. "I am here to meet the Callahan brothers." The silence that followed was so complete that Clara could hear a dog scratching behind the dry goods store 3 buildings away. Mrs. Pemberton's face cycled through surprise, pity, and a kind of mean amusement that settled into her features like water finding the lowest ground. "You are the mail-order bride. I am the respondent to their advertisement. Yes, Lord have mercy." The boarding house owner shook her head slowly, savoring the moment the way some people savor bad news. "Honey, those boys just ran 20 women off the boardwalk not 30 minutes ago. 20. The banker's daughter, the judge's own girl, women who can rope and ride and shoot." Silas Callahan looked every one of them in the eye and said no. You know what he asked them? Clara waited. "Can you birth a calf? Can you haul water from a half-mile well? Can you sit up 3 nights straight with a dying woman and not fall apart?" Mrs. Pemberton leaned forward. Not one of them could answer. Not one of them tried. And those were frontier women, Miss Whitmore. Women built for this country. You look like a strong wind would knock you clean into the next territory. "I did not come here because I am strong, Mrs. Pemberton." Clara tightened her grip on the saddlebag. "I came because their mother is sick, and I know how to help. You a nurse, I am an herbalist. My grandmother was a healer in the Appalachian Mountains." Mrs. Pemberton laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a woman watching someone walk toward a cliff. "An herbalist from back east." coming to cure what Doc Marsh cannot. She waved a hand toward the north road. Copper Hollow is 6 hours up into the hills by wagon. Gideon Callahan was supposed to send someone for you, but seeing as how Silas just declared war on every woman in the county, I would not hold my breath. Clara waited on that boardwalk for 3 hours. The sun moved. The shadows shifted. Nobody came. She sat on her trunk in the narrow strip of shade beside the general store and opened her grandmother's journal because reading steadied her, because the familiar handwriting was the closest thing she had to a living voice. Golden seal root ground fine, white oak bark boiled to paste, raw honey unheated. Apply warm compress to closed eyes 3 times daily. The infection will fight. The body will burn. But the nerve remembers light. Give it reason to remember. Clara closed the journal. She pressed it against her chest. She thought about the advertisement she had answered 6 weeks ago, folded inside her trunk. The words she had memorized in the back room of a Boston seamstress shop, where she worked 14 hours a day for wages that barely covered the rent on a room smaller than a horse stall. 3 brothers of good character seek woman of steady constitution to assist in the care of our ailing mother on Mountain Ranch. Must be willing to work. Must not be afraid of hard living. Marriage to 1 brother, negotiable upon mutual agreement. Respond to G. Callahan, Copper Hollow Ranch, Ridgewater, Texas. Marriage negotiable. Like a clause in a contract. Like a business term for something that was supposed to be sacred. She had written back. She had described herself honestly. Mostly, she had mentioned her grandmother's herbal knowledge. She had mentioned her education. She had not mentioned that her nursing experience consisted entirely of watching her grandmother treat patients in their Appalachian kitchen, or that the closest she had come to ranch life was reading about it in dime novels. She had told herself it was not lying. It was optimistic framing. She had also not mentioned the real reason the name Callahan had stopped her cold. 13 years ago, Clara had been 10 years old traveling with her grandmother through Texas on one of Eleanor Whitmore's annual circuits, selling tinctures and remedies to frontier families. They had stopped in Ridgewater. A group of boys had cornered Clara behind the livery stable. Snake oil girl, they called her. Gypsy trash. They threw rocks. One caught her above the left eye. She fell in the mud face bleeding, crying without sound, because she had already learned that crying out loud only made it worse. A wagon had stopped in the street. A woman climbed down. She was tall and straight-backed with iron gray hair pinned beneath a sunbonnet and the bearing of a woman who had never in her life been afraid of boys or men or God himself. She walked to where Clara lay in the mud. She knelt down. She did not care about her dress. She took a white handkerchief from her sleeve and wiped the blood and the mud from Clara's face with hands that were firm and gentle at the same time. The smallest people carry the biggest storms, child. The woman's voice was steady and warm and absolutely certain. Do not let them see you break. That woman was Cordelia Callahan. Clara never forgot. Not the handkerchief, not the voice, not the way it felt to be seen by a stranger when the rest of the world was looking through her. 13 years later, sitting in a sweatshop in Boston with bleeding fingers and an empty stomach, she had read the name Callahan on a scrap of newsprint, and the memory had risen up inside her like floodwater. She had written the letter that night, now 3 hours into waiting on a boardwalk in a town that did not want her. Clara understood that nobody was coming to get her. The Callahan brothers had rejected 20 women, and they were not about to send a wagon for number 21. Gideon might have intended to, but something had gone wrong on the mountain, and intentions did not change the fact that Clara was alone in a strange town with no money for a room and no stage out until Thursday. She had 2 choices. Wait for Thursday, ride back to Boston, back to the seamstress shop and the debt and the room with no window, or go up herself. She was still deciding when she heard the voices. She had walked to the public water pump behind the courthouse to fill her canteen. The pump was in a narrow alley where the shadows were deep and the walls were close, and the two men standing on the courthouse steps did not see her and did not lower their voices because nobody lowered their voices for a woman who was not there. The Callahan woman is finished. The first voice was educated, clinical, precise. Dr. Phineas Marsh, though Clara did not yet know his name. Both eyes, I give it 3 weeks before she is completely blind. And when she is blind, the second voice was deeper, smoother. It had the oiled cadence of a man who was accustomed to being obeyed. Judge Harlan Crane. Callahan breaks. He cannot run 1,200 head of cattle and nurse a blind woman. Not with just the three of them. He will sell. He will not sell to me. He hates me. He will not have a choice. When Cordelia goes blind, he will need money for a caretaker, a proper house in town medicine. I will make him an offer on the copper land, below value naturally. He will take it because he will not have options. A pause, the click of a cigar being lit. The sweet, acrid smell of expensive tobacco drifted down into the alley. And if he does not, the doctor's voice dropped. Then we make his options worse. The judge laughed. The sound was quiet and cold, and it moved through Clara like ice water poured down her spine. They walked away. Their bootsteps faded on the wooden planks. Clara stood pressed against the courthouse wall, her canteen half full, her hands shaking, her heartbeat so loud she was certain the whole town could hear it. She had been in Ridgewater for less than 4 hours, and she already knew 3 things with the cold clarity of a woman who had nothing left to lose. 1. Cordelia Callahan was not going blind from disease. She was being blinded on purpose. 2. The doctor was the weapon. 3. Nobody in this town was going to save that woman except Clara. She finished filling her canteen. She walked back to her trunk. She sat down. She stared at the north road that climbed into the hills and disappeared into the dark pines like a wound in the earth. Then she stood up. She found Jonah at the public livery. He was the oldest mule in Ridgewater, possibly the oldest mule in Texas. A gray, sway-back creature with one milky eye in the disposition of a man who had seen everything the world had to offer and found it all lacking. The livery boy charged her 50 cents and looked at her like she was paying for her own funeral. Nobody rides up to Copper Hollow at night, ma'am. The trail washes out past the second ridge. You will break your neck. Then I will break my neck, Clara said, and she saddled the mule. They left Ridgewater at midnight. The town was dead. One lamp burning in the saloon. A dog barking somewhere far off. Nobody saw them go. Nobody would have stopped them if they had. The trail broke Clara apart piece by piece. The first hour was just steep. Her thighs burned from gripping the saddle. Her hands ached on the reins. Jonah's hooves slipped on loose shale, and every slip sent Clara's heart into her throat. The second hour got cold, bitter bone-deep cold that cut through her wool coat like it was paper. Her fingers went numb. Her nose ran. She could not feel the reins anymore. She held on through muscle memory and prayer. The third hour, Jonah stopped. Dead stop. Would not move. Clara climbed down and felt ahead with her boot. The trail had washed out. A gap of 3 feet, maybe 4, where the ground had simply slid away into the blackness below. She could not see the bottom. The wind came up from the canyon, and it smelled like pine and wet rock and nothing. She stood at the edge of nothing, a small woman on a dark mountain, and she thought about turning back. Nobody would blame you, she whispered. Nobody even knows you are here. Go home. Sleep. Let the doctor handle it. The doctor who wanted Cordelia blind. The doctor who was conspiring with the judge to steal the Callahan's land. Damn it. Clara grabbed Jonah's bridle and led him off the trail through scrub brush and loose rock around the washout. She slipped twice. The second time she went down hard on her knee and felt skin tear through her dress. Blood warm and wet soaking through the fabric. She got up. She kept going. By the time the sky turned gray, she could see the ranch below. Big cabin, stone chimney, trailing smoke corrals full of dark shapes. Cattle, hundreds of them, shifting and lowing in the morning cold. A barn the size of a small church. And beyond it all, the mountains rolling purple and gold to the horizon. Clara slid off Jonah. Her legs buckled. She grabbed the fence post and held on until her knees stopped shaking. She tied the mule. She pulled the saddlebag over her shoulder. She walked to the front door. Her hand hovered over the wood. Inside, a dog was barking. She could smell coffee. She could smell something else underneath. Something sweet and wrong. Infection. She knew that smell. Her grandmother had taught her to read sickness the way other women read recipes. She knocked 3 times. Hard. Boots on floorboards. Heavy. Fast. The door swung open. Silas Callahan filled the frame like a wall of flesh and fury. Shirtless, coffee in one hand, the scar pulling his face into a permanent snarl. He was 6'6", and every inch of him looked like it had been carved from the mountain itself. His amber eyes hit her like winter. He looked at her, all of her. The muddy boots, the coat straining at the buttons, the sweat-soaked hair plastered to her flushed face, the knee bleeding through her dress, the saddlebag clutched against her chest like a shield. "Whatever you are selling, I ain't buying. I ain't selling. I am here for your mother." His eyes narrowed. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me. You rode up here alone." He looked at Jonah tied to his fence, looking half dead. "In the dark." "Yes. Why?" "Because your mother is going blind and I can stop it." Silas laughed. One short, hard bark, it had no humor in it at all. "Doc Marsh says the nerve is dying, nothing to be done. Doc Marsh is a liar and a thief, and if you let him near your mother again, you will lose more than her eyes." That stopped the laughter dead. Silas's hand tightened on the door frame until his knuckles went white. His jaw locked. The scar stretched tight across his cheekbone. "What did you just say?" "I said your doctor is a liar. I heard him yesterday outside the courthouse, him and Judge Crane. They want your mother blind, Silas. They want you broken so you will sell the copperland cheap before the railroad comes through." The silence between them was a living thing. It breathed. It watched. It waited. "You are lying," Silas said. "I sew buttons for a living, Mr. Callahan. I do not have the imagination to lie. And you think you can fix what a trained doctor cannot. You, a girl from Boston. My grandmother was a healer. Appalachian folk medicine remedies passed down through generations of mountain families. She spent 40 years documenting what mountain women had known for centuries. She taught me everything before she died. I have her journal. I have her medicine. I can make a compress that will draw the infection out and save the nerve before the damage is permanent." Hoodoo, Silas said. "My mother ain't your experiment. Your mother is going blind. I know that." The words exploded out of him. Raw, ragged, ripped from somewhere deep beneath the scar and the muffle and the 12 years of armor. For 1 second, the mask dropped. Clara saw it. The boy underneath the scarred man. The son watching his mother disappear into darkness. Terrified and helpless and furious about both. Then the mask came back. Hard, cold, final. "Go home, girl. You are wasting my time." He closed the door. Not a slam, worse. A slow, deliberate push, the oak swinging shut with the quiet finality of a coffin lid. Clara stood on the porch. The morning air bit her cheeks. Her knee was bleeding through her dress. Her hands were numb. She did not move. 1 minute. 2. 3. She stood there staring at the closed door, the saddlebag cutting into her shoulder. Then from inside the cabin, Cordelia screamed. Not a scream of pain, a scream of terror. The sound of a woman reaching for something in the dark and finding nothing. The sound of a world going black. "Silas, Silas. I cannot see the window. The light. Silas, the light is gone. It was there this morning, and now it is gone. Silas, help me. Help me." Clara heard boots scrambling inside, heard Silas's voice cracking like dry wood. "Ma, I am here. I am right here. Do not touch the bandages. Ma, please. I cannot see your face, Silas. I cannot see my son's face. Clara pressed her hand flat against the door. She felt the wood vibrate with Cordelia's sobs. 10 seconds passed. The door opened. Silas stood there. His eyes were red. His jaw was clenched so tight the scar looked like it might split open. His chest was heaving. He did not speak. He stepped aside. Clara walked in. The cabin was dark and hot fire roaring in the stone fireplace. A massive wolfhound lifted its head from the hearth, sniffed her once, and lay back down. The air was thick with wood smoke, and underneath it, that sweet, cloying wrong smell. Clara did not stop. She walked straight past Silas, past the kitchen table, past the rifle hanging over the mantel to the back room. Cordelia Callahan sat in a rocking chair by the window. Her hands were tearing at the bandages on her eyes, her fingers bloody from clawing at the cloth. She was rocking violently, the chair slamming against the floor with each pass. Mrs. Callahan. Clara knelt. She caught Cordelia's hands and held them. Mrs. Callahan it is, Clara. Clara Whitmore. Cordelia froze. Her torn fingers gripped Clara's wrists. Whitmore. The rocking stopped. The bloody fingers moved over Clara's face, cheeks, jaw, forehead, mapping her. Do I know you, child? You did once, 13 years ago, behind the livery stable in this town. A little girl with mud and blood on her face and boys throwing rocks. You stopped your wagon. You wiped my face clean with a white handkerchief. You told me the smallest people carry the biggest storms. Cordelia's fingers stopped on Clara's cheek. The silence in the room changed. It was not empty anymore. It was full. The snake oil girl, Cordelia whispered. Little snake oil girl. She grew up. Clara's throat closed. She swallowed hard. I grew up, ma'am, and I brought medicine. My grandmother's medicine. I can help your eyes, but I need you to trust me. Your grandmother. Cordelia's grip tightened on Clara's hands. Eleonora, I remember Eleonora. She had hands like a preacher and a laugh that could shake walls. She sold me fever few for my headaches, and it worked better than anything Marsh ever prescribed. The town let her pass through without trouble because even the men who called her names bought her remedies in secret. Cordelia's voice broke. I should have done more for that little girl. I should have done more than just wipe the mud off her face. I am sorry, Clara. I am so sorry. That is not why I am here, Clara said. Then why? Because you stopped, Clara said. You stopped your wagon and you knelt in the mud, and you were the only person in my entire life who ever did, because you told me I was carrying a storm. And now I am here to prove you were right. Cordelia's hand slid down to Clara's and held it. The grip of a woman reaching for solid ground in a world gone dark. Silas, Cordelia called out. Her voice had changed. The terror was gone. In its place was the iron tone of a woman who had run a frontier schoolroom for 30 years and had buried 2 sons and raised 3 more and was not finished yet. He was already in the doorway. Gideon had appeared behind his left shoulder, tall and lean, hazel green eyes taking in the scene with the analytical calm of a man who missed nothing. Ezra stood behind Gideon's right, his blue eyes wide, his face open with something that looked like hope. 3 mountains behind a door. This girl's grandmother saved more lives than every doctor in Texas combined, Cordelia said. If Clara says she can help me, then she can help me. You will not interfere. You will do what she tells you. Are we clear, Ma? Silas started. Are we clear? Silas James Callahan, 3 names. The full name. The weapon of every mother since the beginning of time. Silas uncrossed his arms. He looked at Clara kneeling on the floor in her muddy coat, holding his mother's bloody hands with a leather journal and a desperate promise. She gets Sam's old room, Silas said. He turned and walked away. Gideon nodded to Clara once, a small, formal acknowledgement that carried more weight than a speech. Then he followed. Ezra lingered. He looked at Clara with something warm and complicated in his blue eyes. Welcome to the mountain, Miss Whitmore, he said softly. And then he too was gone. Clara sat on the floor beside Cordelia's chair. The fire crackled. The wolfhound sighed. Outside, the mountains settled into morning, and somewhere far below, Ridgewater stirred awake, not knowing that the woman it had ignored was about to change everything. Cordelia, Clara said, I need to examine your eyes tonight. Before I can plan the treatment, I need to know how much damage has been done. Do what you must, child. Clara unwrapped the bandages slowly. The eyes beneath were swollen shut, the lids crusted an angry red, the skin around them hot enough to feel from inches away. But when Clara pressed gently near the bridge of Cordelia's nose, the old woman flinched. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. The nerve was alive, damaged, screaming, assaulted, but alive. And the pattern of damage was wrong. It was not the gradual deterioration of natural nerve decay. It was the acute, localized chemical burning of a deliberately applied substance. Mercury poisoning, applied topically to the eyes. Slow, systematic destruction masked as treatment. Cordelia Callahan was not going blind from disease. Someone was blinding her. And Clara was now the only person on this mountain who knew it. That night, Clara lay on the cot in Sam Callahan's old room. The room still had a young man's saddle draped over the chair and a carved wooden horse on the shelf. 12 years of dust on a dead boy's belongings. Nobody had touched them. Nobody could. She opened her grandmother's journal by candlelight and read every entry on mercury poisoning, every entry on optic nerve damage, every treatment protocol Eleanor Whitmore had documented across 4 decades of Appalachian healing. Golden seal root to draw the toxin, white oak bark to reduce inflammation, raw honey as an antimicrobial, comfrey root for nerve regeneration, capsicum tincture in the final treatment to force blood flow to the healing nerve. It would work. She believed it would work. But tomorrow she would have to convince 3 men who did not trust her, did not know her, and in Silas's case actively wanted her gone, to place their mother's remaining sight in the hands of a 23-year-old orphan with a leather journal and no medical credentials. She closed the journal. She pressed it against her chest. Tomorrow she would either begin saving Cordelia Callahan's eyes, or she would be thrown off the mountain. Clara closed her eyes and was asleep in 30 seconds. Not because she was at peace, but because her body battered by 6 days of travel, 6 hours of mountain trail, a torn knee, and the accumulated weight of everything she had learned simply gave out. In the back room, Cordelia Callahan held Clara's grandmother's journal against her chest. She was not sleeping. She was crying. Not the tears of a woman losing her sight, the tears of a woman who had just been given a reason to hope. And down the hall, Silas Callahan sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He was thinking about a small woman with cornflower blue eyes who had ridden a mule up his mountain alone in the pitch dark and looked at his scar without flinching and called his doctor a liar. He was thinking about the sound of his mother's voice when she said, "This girl stays." The iron in it, the certainty. For the first time in 6 months, Cordelia Callahan had sounded like Cordelia Callahan. Silas sat in the dark until morning. Dawn came hard and fast. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of boots on floorboards. Multiple boots, heavy. She dressed quickly, braided her hair tight, and walked into the kitchen. All 3 Callahan brothers were there. The kitchen had been built for large men, and even so they filled it to the walls. Silas stood at the cast iron stove frying eggs, the muscles of his back shifting under scarred skin. Gideon sat at the table with a ledger book, making notations in precise handwriting. Ezra was feeding the wolfhound scraps of bacon from his plate and talking to it in a low conversational voice as if the dog were a business partner. "Good morning," Clara said. Ezra grinned. Gideon nodded. Silas did not turn around. "Sit," Silas said. He slid a plate of eggs and bacon onto the table. "Eat, then talk." Clara sat. She ate. The eggs were good. The bacon was burned at the edges. The coffee was black and bitter, and strong enough to strip paint, and it was exactly what she needed after 6 hours on a mule. When the plate was clean, she set her grandmother's journal on the table and opened it. "I need to tell you something," Clara said, "and you are not gonna like it." 6 eyes locked on her, amber, hazel, green, blue. 3 men built like the mountains they lived on, staring at a woman who owned 110 pounds and was about to light a fire under their entire world. She told them everything. She told them what she had overheard behind the courthouse. Marcia's clinical voice, Crane's cigar. The plan to blind Cordelia and break the Callahans and steal the Copperland for a fraction of its value. She told them what she had found when she examined Cordelia's eyes. The pattern of chemical burns inconsistent with natural nerve decay. The telltale signs of repeated mercury exposure. She opened the journal to the relevant pages and showed them Eleanor's notes comparing natural optic nerve disease to topical mercury poisoning. The differences were clear even to men who had never studied medicine. Natural nerve decay was gradual asymmetric variable. What was happening to Cordelia's eyes was acute, perfectly symmetrical, and localized. Both eyes affected identically at the same rate with the same intensity. That did not happen with disease. That happened with a deliberately applied substance. And then she told them what she could do about it. Golden Seal compresses, applied warm 3 times daily for 3 days. The Golden Seal draws the mercury residue from the tissue. White oak bark reduces inflammation. Raw honey prevents secondary infection. On the 3rd day, I add comfrey root for nerve regeneration and capsicum tincture to force blood flow to the damaged nerve. She looked at each brother in turn. The treatment will be excruciating. Your mother will scream. She will beg you to take the compress off. She will fight you. You cannot let her. The burn is the medicine working. It means the nerves are still alive, still responding. The pain is the proof that she can still be saved. Silence. Gideon spoke first. His voice was careful, measured. The voice of a man who processed information the way he processed legal contracts. You are telling us that Doc Marsh has been deliberately blinding our mother. For money. On Harlan Crane's orders. Yes. And you can prove this. We can prove the damage is not natural. The burn pattern is too acute, too localized, too symmetrical. Both eyes, identical rate, identical intensity. That does not happen with disease, Gideon. That happens with chemistry. Gideon leaned back. He looked at Silas. Silas had not moved. He stood with his back against the counter, arms crossed over his bare chest, his scarred face completely still. But his eyes. Those amber eyes that Clara was learning to read the way she read her grandmother's journal by the details others missed. His eyes were burning. Hoodoo, Silas said flatly. You want to treat my mother with mountain hoodoo. Appalachian folk medicine, Clara corrected. Remedies that mountain families passed down for generations before your doctor's great-grandfather was born. This is not magic, Mr. Callahan. It is chemistry. And it works. And if you are wrong, if I am wrong, your mother loses nothing. She is not already losing. Doc Marsh says she will be blind by Christmas. If I fail, she goes blind on his schedule. If I succeed, she sees again. The only risk is doing nothing. Ezra leaned forward. I believe her. Silas's eyes cut to his youngest brother. You believe every stray that wanders onto this mountain. And I have been right more often than you have been wrong, brother. The tension between them hummed like a wire pulled tight. Gideon raised his hand. A small gesture, but both brothers responded to it instantly, the way well-trained horses respond to a familiar rider. The strategist asserting control. The question is not whether we believe her, Gideon said. The question is whether we can afford not to try. Marsh says Ma is finished. If he is lying, and what Clara overheard suggests he is, then his treatment is the threat, not the cure. Stopping his treatment and trying Clara's is the rational move, regardless of whether we trust her medicine. Gideon looked at Silas. We placed that advertisement to find someone who could help Ma. Clara rode 6 hours in the dark on a mule to get here. She is the only person who showed up. Let her try. Silas stared at Clara for a long time. The fire popped. The wolfhound sighed. The scar pulled at his face, and behind it something was moving. Something he did not want to let out. "What do you need?" Silas asked. The fight was gone from his voice. Clara did not waste the opening. "Hot water, clean cloth, every candle you have. And I need to know the layout of this ranch. If Crane is serious about breaking you, he will not stop at blinding your mother. He will come for your cattle, your fences, your water. I need to understand what we are defending." "We." Silas raised an eyebrow. "We," Clara held his gaze. "That is the arrangement, Mr. Callahan. I help your mother. You protect this ranch. And we do it together." The words sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. Together, a word Silas Callahan had not used in 12 years. He uncrossed his arms. "Ezra, show her the ranch. She needs to know the property." Gideon pulled the file on the copper claim. "I want to know exactly what Crane thinks he is buying." He turned back to Clara. "And you, mix your medicine. We start today." Ezra led Clara through the ranch that morning, and it was like walking through the body of a living thing. Every part connected to every other part, every system depended on the one beside it. The corrals held 8 horses, each one Ezra called by name. Clara had never touched a horse in her life. Ezra showed her how to place her palm flat against a horse's neck so it could learn her scent. The mare's skin was warm and rough under her fingers, and the animal turned its head to look at her with eyes that were brown and deep and utterly unimpressed. The water system ran from a mountain spring through wooden troughs Silas had built himself, the joints sealed with pine pitch, the flow controlled by a gate mechanism Gideon had designed from a drawing in an engineering manual. The smokehouse held venison and elk hung from cross beams, curing in the cool, dark air. The root cellar was stacked with potatoes, dried corn, and flour in tin barrels sealed against mice. In the small forge behind the barn, Silas's tools hung in precise rows. Tongs hammers the heavy anvil scored with 10,000 strikes. Ezra explained that Silas did his own shoeing, his own repairs, his own metal work. There was no one else to do it. On this mountain you were everything or you were nothing. The fence line ran 3 miles around the main pasture, barbed wire strung between cedar posts. Ezra walked it every morning, checking for breaks from weather or animals. Beyond the fence, the land fell away into canyons and ridges that stretched to the horizon. Beautiful and empty and absolute. 3 gears in one machine, Ezra said, squinting against the morning sun. Silas runs the cattle and the physical work. Gideon handles the business and the law. I manage the animals in the daily operation. Pull 1 gear out and the whole thing stops turning. He paused, his blue eyes clouded briefly. Used to be 5 gears, he said quietly. Then he moved on and did not say anything else about it, and Clara filed the silence away. She was good at noticing what people did not say. That afternoon, a storm hit the mountain without warning. The sky went from blue to black in 20 minutes, and the wind came screaming down the canyon like something alive. 10 head of cattle broke through the south fence and scattered into the brush. Silas and Ezra were on horseback and gone before Clara could blink. Gideon stayed to guard the cabin and Cordelia. Clara stood in the kitchen, useless, watching through the window as the rain came down in sheets so thick she lost sight of the barn. She could not ride. She could not rope. She could not shoot. She was everything Mrs. Pemberton had said she was. A strong wind waiting to happen. But she could boil water. She could tear clean bandages. She could mix an antiseptic wash from yarrow and witch hazel. She could prepare. Silas came through the door at midnight, soaking wet shirt plastered to his body, hands bleeding from pulling barbed wire in the dark. He stood in the kitchen, dripping water onto the floorboards, breathing hard, and he looked at the table. Hot water in the basin, clean cloth folded beside it. A jar of antiseptic, the sharp, clean smell of yarrow, cutting through the cabin's wood smoke. Claire stood beside the table. "Sit down," she said. What, your hands are bleeding. Sit down. Something moved across Silas's face, not gratitude. Not yet. Something more complicated than that. He sat. Clara took his hands. It was the first time she had touched him. His hands were enormous in hers, rough as tree bark, calloused and scarred and bleeding from a dozen wire cuts. Her hands were small and pale and steady. She washed the cuts carefully, methodically, the way her grandmother had taught her. Gentle pressure, clean water, let the wound breathe. Silas did not speak. He watched her work. The candlelight caught the gold in her hair, the concentration in her face, the quiet certainty in her fingers. She handled his wounds the way she handled everything, without fuss, without hesitation, with the absolute focus of a woman who had been trained to heal. "You do not have to do this," Silas said. His voice was rough, but the roughness had changed. It was not anger anymore. It was something he did not have a name for. "You do not have to thank me," Clara said without looking up. "But you do have to sit still." She finished bandaging his hands. She made him coffee. She sat across from him at the table, and they did not speak because there was nothing that needed to be said, and because the silence between them had begun to change, had begun to shift from the silence of strangers to the silence of people who had survived something together and were trying to figure out what came next. The next evening, after Cordelia was sleeping and Silas was walking the perimeter, Clara sat by the fire with Gideon. It was the first real conversation she had with any of the brothers that was not about medicine or conspiracy or survival. Gideon told her about their mother, how Cordelia had taught school for 30 years, how she had educated half the children in the territory when there were no schools using the family Bible and a slate board and sheer force of will, how she had taught Gideon to read law books because she believed that a man who understood the law could never be cheated by it. "She said words are the only thing a man owns that nobody can take from him," Gideon said. Clara told him about Eleonora, how her grandmother had spent 40 years documenting remedies that mountain families had passed down for generations, how she treated anyone who came to her door regardless of whether they could pay, how she said healing was not a transaction. It was a conversation between the medicine and the body. Gideon studied her with those hazel green eyes that missed nothing. "I placed that advertisement because I was out of options," he said. "Silas did not want it. He thinks needing help is the same as being weak. And you, I think needing help is the same as being smart enough to know your limits." Gideon paused. "I also think you are the most dangerous person in this cabin, Miss Whitmore. And I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give." The next morning, Clara tried to cook breakfast. She burned the bacon. She broke 2 eggs, trying to crack them on the edge of the pan. The coffee came out thin enough to read through. Ezra ate every bite without complaint. Gideon drank the coffee with the stoic endurance of a man who had consumed worse on the trail. Silas looked at the charred bacon, then at Clara, then at the pan. "The bacon is supposed to stop burning before you serve it," he said. "And the coffee is supposed to taste like something," Clara replied. "Looks like we are both learning." Ezra laughed. A real laugh, full and sudden, the kind that fills a room and makes the walls feel warmer. It was the first laugh that had sounded in this cabin in a long time. Clara could feel it in the air, the way you feel the first warm day after a long winter. Something thawing, something coming back to life. Even Silas. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The scar would not allow a smile. But a softening, a fraction of the permanent tension in his face releasing just for a moment like a fist unclenching. After breakfast, Ezra took Clara to the woodpile and put an axe in her hands. The axe weighed nearly as much as she did. She swung it 3 times and missed the log twice, and nearly took off her own foot once. Ezra placed his hand on her shoulder. Gentle, patient the way he handled nervous horses. Feet wider. "Let the axe do the work. You are not trying to punish the wood. You are asking it to open." The 4th swing, the log split clean down the middle. Clara stared at the 2 halves lying in the dirt. Then she laughed, A real laugh, full and warm and surprised, the kind she had not heard come out of her own mouth since before her grandmother died. From the porch, Silas watched. He did not speak. He did not approach. But he did not look away. That evening, Clara made Cordelia's tea with honey the way Ezra told her the old woman liked it and carried it to the back room. She stopped in the doorway. Silas was already there. He was sitting in the chair beside his mother's rocker, reading to her from the Bible. His voice, the same voice that had barked orders and rejected 20 women and told Clara to go home, was quiet now, slow, careful with each word, as if the words were fragile and he was afraid of breaking them. Cordelia had fallen asleep, her bandaged head tilted to one side, her breathing steady. But Silas kept reading. He read for himself because reading aloud to his mother was the only way he knew how to say "I love you" without having to use those words. Clara set the tea on the table without making a sound. She stepped back. Silas looked up. Their eyes met in the candlelight, amber and cornflower blue. 1 second, 2, 3. He did not look away. She did not either. Something passed between them. Something small and deep and irreversible. Not a word, not a touch, just a recognition. The same recognition Clara had felt 13 years ago when a stranger knelt in the mud and wiped blood from a little girl's face. The recognition that some people see you, truly see you, and once they do, nothing is ever the same. Clara turned and walked to the kitchen. Silas turned back to the Bible. Neither of them spoke about it. Neither of them needed to. But that night, for the first time since she arrived on the mountain, Clara did not check the lock on her bedroom door. She was not sure what that meant, but she thought maybe he would understand. What neither of them knew was that tomorrow would bring the fire. The first compress, the first scream, the first moment when Silas Callahan would have to choose between his fear and his faith in a woman he had known for 2 days. And what Clara did not know, could not yet know, was that the fire in Cordelia's eyes would be only the beginning. Because Harlan Crane had heard about the woman on the mountain, and he was already making his move. The storm was coming, and on this mountain, storms did not ask permission. Clara prepared the first compress the way her grandmother had taught her, with precision, with reverence, with hands that did not shake because shaking was a luxury she could not afford. She laid out the golden seal paste on a clean cloth. The white oak bark soaked in warm water, the raw honey thick and golden unheated. Strips of linen torn from a shirt Ezra had volunteered before she asked. She measured by feel, mixed by instinct, the way Eleanor had mixed medicine for 40 years in a kitchen that smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke, and a love so steady it had outlasted everything except death. Cordelia sat in her rocking chair. She had not slept, but the terror of yesterday was gone, replaced by something harder and older. A composed calm, a battle calm, the calm of a woman who had birthed 5 sons and buried 2 and was not finished fighting. "This is going to hurt, Cordelia," Clara said. "You already told me that, child. I am telling you again because I need you to understand. The mercury has been settling into your tissue for 3 months. The golden seal is going to pull it out and the process will feel like fire. You will want me to stop. You will beg me to stop. I cannot stop. If I pull the compress before the toxin is drawn, I seal the poison deeper and make everything worse. Then do not stop," Cordelia said, "and call me by my name. If you are going to set my eyes on fire, we ought to be on a first-name basis." Clara looked at the doorway. All 3 Callahan brothers stood there. Silas in the center shoulders, nearly touching both sides of the frame. Gideon on his left, still as stone. Ezra on his right, his face pale beneath his tan. "I need 2 of you to hold her shoulders," Clara said. "Whoever has the steadiest hands," Misla said, before anyone else could speak. "Me and Ezra." They took their positions. Silas and Ezra knelt on either side of the rocking chair, their massive hands on Cordelia's shoulders. Clara knelt in front, the warm compress in her hands. The golden seal smell filled the room. Sharp, earthy, ancient. The smell of medicine older than memory. Ready, Cordelia. I birthed Ika. Callahan, the old woman said. He weighed 11 pounds. I am ready for anything. Clara pressed the compress against Cordelia's eyes. For 2 heartbeats, nothing happened. The cabin held its breath. The fire popped in the hearth. The wolfhound lifted its head. Then Cordelia Callahan screamed. The sound was not human. It tore through the cabin like something alive, hit the timber walls, bounced off the stone chimney, and came back sharper. Cordelia's back arched out of the rocking chair with a force that made the wood groan beneath her. Her hands shot up, clawing at the compress, clawing at her own face. Silas caught her wrists and pinned them against the chair arms. His knuckles went white, his teeth bared. The scar stretched tight across his face like a wire about to snap. Take it off, Silas roared. You are killing her. I am saving her, Clara said. Her voice was iron, pure iron. The voice of Eleanora Whitmore's granddaughter forged in the same fire that had created the medicine. Not loud, not desperate, certain. The way a river is certain of its course. Hold her, Silas. She can take this. She cannot. She is stronger than all of you combined, and you know it. Hold her. Cordelia screamed again, a raw, guttural, primal sound that did not belong to a 63-year-old schoolteacher. It belonged to something ancient, something animal, something being burned alive from the inside. The mercury was surrendering. The poison was being pulled from the tissue by the golden seal, dragged out cell by cell, and the body was fighting the cure the way bodies always fight the thing that saves them. Ezra's face was white as chalk. His hands on Cordelia's shoulders were trembling, but he held, because Ezra Callahan had spent his entire life holding things together, horses and fences and his own heart, and he was not going to stop now. Gideon stood behind Clara. His jaw was locked, his hazel green eyes tracking the compress with the analytical intensity of a man watching a battle unfold and calculating the odds in real time. Clara pressed the compress tighter. Her small hands were steady against Cordelia's temples, steady when everything else in the room was shaking. Steady because her grandmother's hands had been steady, and her grandmother's hands before that, all the way back to the first woman who pressed a leaf against a wound and believed it would heal. Cordelia. Clara leaned close, her mouth near the old woman's ear. Cordelia, listen to me. This is the fire before the healing. Your body is fighting. Let it fight. Do not quit on me. Do not you dare quit. Cordelia's screaming dropped to a moan. Her fingers uncurled from Silas's grip. Her chest heaved like a bellows, but the thrashing slowed. Tears streamed from beneath the compress, cutting clear tracks through the crusted discharge on her cheeks. Burns. Cordelia gasped. Lord God, it burns. I know, Clara whispered. Her voice cracked for the first and only time. I know it does. Is it working? Clara looked at the compress. The white linen was turning yellow-green where it touched Cordelia's skin. The mercury residue being drawn out, pulled from the tissue like venom from a snake bite. It is working, Cordelia. Cordelia's hand found Clara's wrist and gripped it. Not fighting anymore. Holding on. Do not leave. I am not going anywhere. Silas watched from the other side of the chair. His hands were still on his mother's wrists, but the pressure had eased. He stared at Clara, at the way she held the compress firm but gentle, at the way she talked his mother down from agony with nothing but her voice, at the calm in her small hands while his own were shaking like leaves in a storm. He did not speak. He did not trust his voice. The first hour was the worst. Cordelia cycled between screaming and whimpering, her body lurching against the chair, her fingers digging into Clara's arm hard enough to leave bruises that would last a week. Clara changed the compress 3 times. Each application drew out more of the greenish-yellow poison. The smell was sharp and sweet and wrong. The smell of something that should never have been inside a human body, being forced out by something that should. By the second hour, Cordelia stopped screaming. Her breathing evened out. Her grip on Clara's arm loosened. She slipped into a heavy, exhausted sleep, her chin dropping to her chest, her body finally surrendering to the medicine. Clara sat back on her heels. Her arms were trembling. Her dress was soaked with sweat. The golden seal paste was smeared up to her elbows, and her honey blonde hair had fallen completely out of its braid, hanging in damp strands around her flushed face. She tried to stand. Her legs had gone numb from kneeling. She pitched forward, and Silas caught her, his hands under her arms lifting her to her feet like she weighed nothing. She was close to him for 1 second, her hands on his chest for balance, his skin warm beneath her palms, his heartbeat steady under her fingers. She pulled her hands back. He set her down. "Sit before you fall," Silas said. His voice was rough, but the roughness had changed again. Something in it had broken open during the last 2 hours, and he had not managed to close it back up. He brought her coffee and cold cornbread with bacon. "Eat the food, Clara," he said it in front of her. "You rode all night, slept 2 hours, and just fought my mother's infection for 2 more. You are shaking so hard you cannot hold your own hand still. Eat." She ate every crumb. The coffee was black and bitter and perfect. She wrapped both hands around the tin cup and let the warmth seep into her frozen fingers, and she felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had been carrying so long, she had forgotten it was there. Silas sat across from her, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The quiet that filled the space between them was not awkward. It was the heavy breathing quiet of two people who had just survived something together and did not have words for it yet. Silas broke first. "What you said on the porch about Marsh and my mother, about Crane and the Copperland, every word was true, I know." He said it flat. No surprise, no outrage. Like a man who had suspected the worst and just had it confirmed. "I have known Crane wanted the Copperland for years. I just did not think he would go through my mother. Men like Crane do not go through people, Silas. They go around them. They wait until you are weak, and then they take what they want and make it look like your idea. You talk like you have dealt with men like that before. I have been invisible my whole life, Mr. Callahan. When people think you are furniture, they say things in front of you they would never say to a person. I have heard more secrets, scrubbing floors and sewing buttons, than most spies hear in a lifetime." A sound escaped Silas. Not quite a laugh, not quite a grunt. Something in between that said he believed her completely. That was 2 days ago. 2 days since the first compress. 2 days since Clara Whitmore knelt on a cabin floor and pressed fire against a blind woman's eyes and refused to stop when a man twice her size told her to. Now it was the third morning, and everything had changed, and nothing had changed, and the mountain did not care about either. Clara woke to screaming. Not Cordelia, a horse. Outside. Screaming the way horses scream when something is deeply fundamentally wrong. She was off the cot and on her feet before her eyes were fully open. Boots pounding in the hallway. All three brothers moving. Silas's voice cutting through the pre-dawn dark like a blade. "Stay inside, Clara." She went to the window. In the gray half-light, she could see Silas and Ezra running toward the corral, rifles in hand. 2 cattle were down, lying on their sides in the dirt, legs, stiff mouths foaming white. Dead. Gideon was at the water trough. He dipped his hand, brought it to his nose. Even from the window, Clara saw his face change. The careful neutrality cracking like ice under a boot heel. "Poison," Gideon said when the brothers gathered. "Bitter almonds, arsenic in the trough." When Silas's voice was the temperature of January. "Last night. Had to be. I watered them at sundown. They were fine." Silas looked toward the trail that led down to Ridgewater. "Someone came up here while we were inside with Ma. While Clara was saving her eyes, someone was poisoning my cattle." Clara opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. "I told you to stay inside," Silas said. "And I am telling you this is Crane, making your options worse." Those were the doctor's exact words. "This is the escalation." 2 dead cattle lay behind him. The trough reeked of chemicals. The mountain that Silas had believed was his fortress had been revealed as a cage that anyone could reach into. Anyone with patience, anyone with money, anyone with a judge's authority and a doctor's access. "I will kill him," Silas said. Quiet, factual, the way a man says, "The sun will rise." "No," Clara said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce. The cornflower blue had gone hard as winter sky. "Because your mother needs you alive and out of prison. And because killing a man is easy, Silas, proving he is a fraud in front of the whole town, that is justice." Silas stared at her. Something shifted behind those amber eyes. He was not looking at her the way he had looked at her on the porch 2 days ago, measuring her weight and finding it lacking. He was looking at her mind, at the thing inside her that would not break, would not bend, would not stop. "You have a plan," he said. "I have the beginning of one. But first, I save your mother's eyes. That is the foundation. If Cordelia can see, Marcia's entire scheme collapses. Crane needs her blind. He needs you desperate. If I take that away from him, he has nothing. Crane can buy anyone. He cannot buy me. I do not own anything worth selling." Gideon, standing behind Silas, met Clara's eyes. The look on his face was not surprise. It was confirmation. The look of a man who had placed an advertisement for a caretaker and received a general instead. The second day's treatment was harder. The medicine was stronger. Double the golden seal, extra white, oak bark, comfrey root added for nerve regeneration. Cordelia did not scream this time. She roared, a deep guttural sound from her chest that shook her whole body and rattled the windows in their frames. Silas held her shoulders. Ezra held her hands. Gideon stood behind Clara, ready. 30 minutes of fire and prayer. But Cordelia did not break. She whispered hymns under her breath. When she ran out of hymns, she whispered her sons' names, all 5 of them. The 2 who were gone and the 3 who were holding her. When Clara lifted the compress away, the linen was soaked through with fluid. Not the yellow-green of infection. Clear, clean. The body flushing itself out, purging the poison. "Cordelia," Clara said. "Open your eyes." Slowly. Cordelia's lids fluttered, trembled. Open. She blinked. Once, twice. Her pupils contracted against the light, reacting to light, and her mouth fell open. "Shapes," Cordelia whispered. "I see shapes. I see. There is the window. It is bright. Everything is blurry, but it is bright." Her hands shot out, grabbing the air. "Silas! Silas! Where are you?" He moved into her line of sight. Cordelia's healing, blurry, terror-filled eyes locked onto a shape that was her eldest son. "I see you," Cordelia breathed. "I cannot see your face yet, but I see you. You are there. You are standing right there." Silas made a sound. Not a word. Something before words. He dropped to his knees and buried his face in his mother's lap, and his shoulders shook. Ezra turned away, pressing his fist against his mouth. Gideon stood very still, his jaw locked, a single tear tracking down his clean, shaven face. Clara walked to the kitchen. She gripped the edge of the counter and let her own tears come. Silently, one hand over her mouth, she cried for Cordelia. She cried for Eleonora, who should have been here to see her medicine work. She cried for the 10-year-old girl in the mud who had been told she was carrying a storm and had spent 13 years trying to believe it. "You were right, Grandma," Clara whispered. "You were right about everything." That afternoon, while Silas and Ezra rode the perimeter, checking for more sabotage, and Gideon inspected the damaged fences, Cordelia asked Clara to close the door. "I heard you talking to my sons on the porch yesterday," Cordelia said. "These walls are thin. You are in danger being here. Crane does not play games. Let him come. You sound like Silas. I will take that as a compliment." "Take it as a warning." Cordelia's voice dropped. The iron was still there, but underneath it was something older. Something that had been locked away for 12 years. I lost 2 sons in that mine, Clara. Clara's hands went still on the fresh compress she was mixing. The explosion was not an accident. The timbers were rotten. The mine owner knew they were rotten. He sent my boys down anyway because replacing timbers cost money and replacing workers cost nothing. Cordelia's voice did not break. It was iron forged in 12 years of silence. Samuel was 20 years old. Thomas was 18. They went down at 7 in the morning, and by 9, I was a mother of 3 instead of 5. The words fell into the room like stones. The mine owner sold his claim to Harlan Crane 6 months after the collapse. Cordelia continued. The same copperland Crane is trying to take from Silas now. The same land my boys died under. Does Silas know? He knows his brothers died. He does not know Crane profited from it. I never told him because I knew what he would do. He would kill him. He would kill him, and they would hang him, and I would bury my last sons, all 3 of them. So I kept quiet for 12 years. I kept quiet, and it ate me alive. Clara sat back. The weight of this secret settled over her like earth on a coffin. Promise me something, Clara. Anything. Promise me you will keep him from doing something he cannot take back. He has his father's temper and my stubbornness, and that is a combination that gets men killed. Clara placed the fresh compress gently against Cordelia's eyes. The old woman hissed at the sting, but did not scream. Her hand found Clara's and held on. I promise, Cordelia. Good. The old woman squeezed her hand. Now fix my eyes, mountain girl. I want to see the look on Harlan Crane's face when his whole world comes crashing down. Night fell. The brothers split their watch. Silas in the barn loft where he could see the main trail. Ezra riding the south perimeter where the fences had been cut. Gideon checking the goat path through the canyon that someone had used to reach the water trough. Clara was alone in the cabin with Cordelia the wolfhound and the rifle over the mantel. She had never fired a rifle in her life. She had told Silas she could not shoot. Both of those things were true. She checked the chamber. Full. She practiced the motion. Shoulder sight squeeze. The rifle was heavy in her small hands. She braced the stock against the chair arm and sat by the fire and waited. An hour passed. 2. The wolfhound's ears perked up once and Clara's finger went to the trigger, but it was only a coyote calling from the canyon. The sound was lonely and old, and it made the cabin feel very small against the night. 3 hours. Then the wolfhound stood up. Not a lazy stretch. A snap to its feet, every muscle rigid, ears flat, a growl starting deep in its chest that vibrated through the floorboards. Clara stood. She cocked the rifle. Footsteps on the porch. Not Silas's boots, not any Callahan's boots. These were lighter, quicker, and there were too many of them. A knock. Miss Whitmore, a man's voice, smooth, educated, wrong. Miss Whitmore, it is Dr. Marsh. I understand you are caring for Mrs. Callahan. I need to examine my patient. Clara's blood went cold. Clara Cordelia called from the back room, her voice tight with fear. Clara, do not open that door. A second voice, deeper, harder. Miss Whitmore, this is Deputy Barnes. The doctor has a legal right to examine his patient. Open the door or I will open it for you. Clara's hands were slick on the rifle stock. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She was alone on a mountain with a healing woman and a loaded gun. The men who had blinded Cordelia were standing on the other side of an oak door, and the only thing between them and finishing what they started was 110 pounds of Boston seamstress who had never fired a weapon in her life. She planted her feet. She raised the rifle. Dr. Marsh! Clara's voice carried through the oak. She was amazed at how steady it sounded, as if it belonged to someone else, someone braver, someone who had done this before. Mrs. Callahan is no longer your patient. She is under my care and she is recovering. You are not welcome here. Miss Whitmore, be reasonable. You have no medical credentials. If that woman goes blind under your care, you will be charged with criminal negligence. Open the door. That woman is getting her sight back, doctor. Something you told her sons was impossible. Now, why would a trained physician lie about a thing like that? Silence on the other side of the door. Long breathing. The silence of a man recalculating. Then Marsh's voice again. Lower. The smoothness stripped away the cultured veneer, cracking to show the fear underneath. I am going to give you to the count of 10, Miss Whitmore. Then the deputy is going to break down this door. Clara pulled the rifle tight against her shoulder. The wolfhound snarled beside her, its lips peeled back over teeth that could crush bone. In the back room, Cordelia was praying. Clara could hear the words through the wall, quiet and steady and fierce. You can count to 1,000, Dr. Marsh. This door stays shut. And if your deputy puts a boot on that wood, I will put a bullet through it and through whatever is standing behind it. I am Eleanor Whitmore's granddaughter. I do not bluff and I do not miss. A lie. She had never fired a gun. She might miss by a mile. She might blow a hole in the ceiling or shoot her own foot off or drop the rifle from sheer terror. But her voice did not lie. Her voice was her grandmother's voice, and her grandmother had never been afraid of any man who ever drew breath. The silence stretched. Clara could hear her own pulse in her ears. She could hear the deputy shifting his weight on the creaking porch boards, the leather of his gun belt creaking as he moved, then hooves coming fast up the trail. More than one horse. The boards on the porch shook as the men outside spun toward the sound. Clara heard Marsh swear under his breath, heard the deputy's gun clear its holster. That is far enough, the deputy shouted into the darkness. Silas's voice cut through the night like a blade swung hard. Barnes, you have got 3 seconds to holster that weapon before I decide you are trespassing on my land with hostile intent, which in the state of Texas gives me every legal right to shoot you where you stand. A second voice. Gideon, calm measured coming from a different direction flanking. And I will testify you drew first. 2 witnesses, a third voice. Ezra, materializing from the darkness as if all 3 brothers had coordinated their return without speaking a word, because that was what brothers did. Make that 3 witnesses. And a fourth voice. Older, rougher, unexpected. Thaddeus Bowen Ferrier. Make that 4. And Reverend Aldridge is behind me making 5. Evening deputy. Interesting hour for a house call. Clara lowered the rifle. Her arms were shaking so badly she had to lean it against the wall. She pressed her forehead against the door and breathed. In and out, in and out. The air tasted like gunpowder and fear and relief. On the other side, she heard the retreat. Boots on the porch fast. Horses mounting. The sound of Marsh and Deputy Virgil Barnes riding hard into the dark. Running. Then Silas's boots. Slow. Heavy. Crossing the porch with the deliberate tread of a man who has arrived exactly where he needs to be. 3 knocks. It is me, Clara. Open up. She opened the door. Silas stood there. Behind him, Gideon Ezra, Thaddeus Bowen, and Reverend Obadiah Aldridge. 5 men windburned and grim rifles in hand. An army assembled in the dark. Silas looked at her face, at the tear tracks, at the white knuckle grip on the door frame, at the rifle leaning against the wall behind her. You all right? I am all right. You pointed a rifle at a deputy. I pointed a rifle at a door. The deputy happened to be behind it. Silas stared at her, and then he laughed. A real laugh, deep and rough and broken at the edges like a wall coming down like ice cracking on a river in March. The laugh of a man who had not laughed in 12 years and had forgotten what it felt like, and was surprised to discover that it felt like this. Like warmth. Like something opening in his chest that he had nailed shut a long time ago. Bowen and Aldridge exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that said more than words. That night around the kitchen table, Clara told them everything. The courthouse conversation, the mercury drops, the poisoned cattle, the cut fences, the midnight visit, and Cordelia's secret about the mine, about Sam and Tom, about the rotten timbers and the negligent owner, and Harlan Crane buying the mineral rights 6 months after two boys died underground in the dark. The silence that followed was the most dangerous sound Claire had ever heard. It was the silence of a fuse burning. "He killed my brothers," Silas said. The words were barely human. "Your mother kept this from you for 12 years because she knew what you would do," Clara said carefully. "She was right to be afraid, Silas. But she told me because she is ready. She is ready to fight, but only if you fight smart." Gideon leaned forward. "We need evidence. Testimony is not enough. Crane will deny everything. We need documentation." "Marsh keeps records," Clara said. "Every doctor does. Payments, treatments, patient logs. If Crane is paying him, it is in those books. And if he has been deliberately mistreating Cordelia, prescribing mercury chloride instead of medicine, that will be in the records too." Every eye in the room locked on her. "His office is behind the apothecary on 2nd Street, Clara continued. "And Dr. Marsh, based on the flask-shaped bulge in his coat pocket, when I saw him yesterday, spends his evenings at the saloon." "You want to break into the doctor's office," Silas said flatly. "Gideon and I will go," Clara said. "Tomorrow night, while you and Ezra guard the ranch." "Not alone," Silas said. "Gideon is the one who knows Crane's operation," Clara replied. "He has been studying this for years. He knows Marsh's schedule. And two people move quieter than three, especially when one of the three is 6'6" and has the most famous face in the county." Silas's jaw clenched. He did not like it. Every instinct in him was fighting against letting Clara walk into danger without him standing between her and whatever was coming. But he looked at Gideon, and Gideon nodded. Once. The nod of a man who had been waiting years for this moment and was not going to miss it. "I do not like it," Silas said. "You do not have to like it. You have to trust me." The word hung between them. Trust. The thing Silas Callahan did not do, the thing he had stopped doing the day the mine swallowed his brothers. "I trust you," Silas said quietly. Like it cost him something. Like it cost him everything. That night before dawn, the final compress went on. The strongest formula. Double golden seal, triple comfrey. A drop of capsicum tincture that burned like the devil's own breath. Cordelia screamed once, a sharp, bitten-off cry. Silas held her. Ezra held her hands. Gideon stood ready. 30 minutes of fire. When Clara lifted the linen away, the cloth was clean. No discharge, no poison, just warm salt water from Cordelia's own tears. "Open your eyes, Cordelia." Cordelia opened her eyes. She looked at Clara. She looked at Silas. She looked at Gideon and Ezra standing behind him. "Oh." Her hands pressed against her mouth. "Oh, Silas. Your face, I can see your face." She reached up and traced the scar with her finger. The raised line that ran from his temple to his jaw, the mark that had defined him for 15 years, the thing that had made him hide on a mountain and close his door to the world. "Your scar does not make you ugly," baby Cordelia whispered. "It makes you alive. It means you survived." Silas could not speak. He pulled his mother close and held her, and his brothers stood around them, 3 mountains guarding the woman who had built them, and Clara stepped back because some moments do not belong to anyone but blood. She walked to the kitchen. She gripped the counter. She closed her eyes. The smallest people carry the biggest storm, she thought. And this storm was just beginning. Because tomorrow night she and Gideon would ride down that mountain in the dark. They would walk into a doctor's office and steal the evidence that would either save the Callahan family or destroy Clara Whitmore. And Harlan Crane, sitting in his fine house in Ridgewater, with his silver watch chain and his cigar and his patient, methodical plan to break 3 brothers and take their land, had no idea that the woman he had never bothered to notice was coming for him. The mountain does not care, Clara thought. But I do. They rode down the mountain in the dark. Gideon led. He rode like a man, born to shadows, quiet and efficient. his horse picking through the pine forest on a trail Clara could not see. Not the wagon road that switched back down in gentle grades. The old hunter's path. Straight through the trees, steep and narrow, the canopy so thick overhead that the stars disappeared, and the only light was the faint gray glow of a moon that could not reach the ground. Clara clung to the saddle horn and trusted the horse. She had no choice. She could see nothing except the dark shape of Gideon ahead of her, moving through the trees with the silent confidence of a man who had ridden this mountain his entire life and knew every root, every stone, every place the ground went soft. They did not speak. Gideon had explained the plan at the cabin with the precision of a military briefing. Entry through the back door of Marcia's office, 15 minutes inside. Find the ledger. Find anything else worth finding. Get out. Marsh drinks at the saloon from 8 until 10. Gideon had said, his wife goes to bed at 9. The office will be empty, and if we are caught, we will not be caught. But if we are, I am a Callahan, and Callahans do not explain themselves to anyone. They reached Ridgewater at 8:30. The town was dark except for the saloon, which threw yellow light across the dirt street in long, crooked rectangles. Piano music drifted through the swinging doors, tinny and cheerful, the sound of men pretending the world was simpler than it was. Gideon tied the horses behind the livery stable. They moved through the back alleys on foot, keeping to the shadows, two shapes that the town would not notice, because the town had never noticed anything it did not want to see. Marcia's office was behind the apothecary on 2nd Street, a small building whitewashed with a shingle hanging over the door that read Dr. P. Marsh, physician and surgeon, in letters that were peeling at the edges. The front was locked. The back door was exactly what Clara had observed from the stagecoach. A simple pin lock, the kind her grandmother's kitchen had. Gideon produced a slim tool from his vest pocket and had the lock open in 4 seconds. Clara did not ask where he had learned that. There were things about Gideon Callahan that existed beneath the calm surface in the law books, and Clara suspected they would stay there. 15 minutes, Gideon whispered. I will watch the street. Clara slipped inside. The examination room smelled of carbolic acid and old paper and something else, something faint and metallic that she recognized. Mercury, the same sweet wrong smell that had lived in Cordelia's bandages for 3 months. She moved through the dark by feel. Table cabinet, shelf desk. The desk was old, heavy, scarred with ink stains. Bottom drawer, underneath a stack of medical journals. The ledger. She pulled it out. She struck a match. One match. Shielded in her cupped hand, the flame dancing against her palm, the shadows leaping on the walls. She opened to the most recent entries. Patient names, treatments, payments. There it was. Cordelia Callahan. Weekly visits beginning 3 months ago. Treatment prescribed. Mercury chloride drops applied directly to the eyes. Clara's hands went cold. She had suspected. She had been almost certain. She had seen the evidence in Cordelia's swollen, burned tissue. But seeing it written in a doctor's own hand, the clinical notation of deliberate poisoning, logged as casually as a prescription for cough syrup, was different. It was confirmation. It was evidence. It was a weapon. She turned the page. Payments. A column marked HC appeared beside Cordelia's name. HC, Harlan Crane. $50 per visit. 3 months of visits. $750 to blind a school teacher. Clara flipped further. Her fingers were trembling so badly she nearly tore the page. She found another section. Land acquisition notes in Marsh's cramped handwriting. Callahan copper claim. Estimated value $40,000. HC purchase price, if distressed, sale $6,000. My share 15%. Contingent on widow status or incapacitation of heir. Clara read the words 3 times. Each time they hit harder. Each time the room got colder. Widow status. Cordelia had no husband. Widow status did not refer to Cordelia. It referred to whoever married one of the brothers. It meant the brothers had to die. All of them. The cattle poisoning was not a warning. It was a rehearsal, a test run for something larger. An accident that would take the Callahan brothers off the mountain permanently. Incapacitation of air, prison, injury, insanity, whatever it took. Crane was not just planning to steal land. He was planning murder. Clara closed the ledger. She tucked it flat against her stomach, hidden by the folds of her dress. She blew out the match. She stood in the dark for 3 seconds, breathing, steadying, pulling herself back together the way a woman pulls a thread through a needle. Precise, deliberate, no room for shaking. She slipped out the back door. Gideon was waiting in the alley, his back against the wall, his eyes on the street. Got it. Got everything. We need to go. Now. Something in her voice made Gideon move without another word. They were on the horses and riding north before the saloon piano finished its song. They did not speak on the trail back up. The forest was black around them, and the horses climbed in steady silence, and Clara held the ledger against her body and tried to breathe normally and could not. The words kept repeating in her head like a hymn sung wrong. Widow status, incapacitation of air, 15%, $6,000, the price of a family. Silas was waiting at the gate when they rode in. He saw Clara's face in the lamplight, and his hand went to the gun on his hip. What happened inside? Not out here. She put the ledger on the kitchen table. She opened it to Cordelia's page. She showed him the mercury chloride entries. She showed him the payments. She showed him the land acquisition notes. Then she showed him the 2 words. Silas read in silence. His face did not change. It went beyond change into something fixed and final, the way metal looks after it has been forged. All the softness burned out. Nothing left but edge. Widow status, Silas said. His voice was very quiet. The quiet before something breaks that cannot be repaired. They were going to kill us. After Cordelia went blind, Clara said, make it look like an accident, a stampede, a fall, another mine collapse. The land goes to Crane for pennies. Marsh gets his 15%. And nobody ever asks why the school teacher went blind and the ranchers died young. Silas closed the ledger. He pressed both palms flat on the table and leaned on them, arms locked head down. He breathed like a man trying not to drown. The muscles in his shoulders were rigid, the scar on his face pulled tight, every tendon in his forearms standing out like cable. Gideon moved to his brother's side. He placed one hand on Silas's shoulder. No words, just contact, just the weight of a brother's hand saying, I am here, and I am not going anywhere. Ezra stood on the other side close enough to touch his jaw, set his blue eyes hard for the first time since Clara had known him. The gentleness was still there, but it had a wall behind it now. The wall of a man who has just learned that someone planned to kill his brothers and is deciding what kind of man he is going to be about it. 3 brothers, one current running between them. The kind of understanding that exists between men who share blood and grief in a mountain. Sunday, Silas said finally. He lifted his head. His amber eyes were burning. Sunday we go to town. Sunday, Clara confirmed. Silas looked at her across the table. The man who had closed the door in her face 4 days ago. The man who had called her a fence post. The man who had tried to send her back to Boston. This is your fight, Clara. You found the truth. You saved my mother. You stole the evidence. My brothers and I, we swung fists and guarded gates, but you are the one who brought the fire. Sunday, you stand up in front of that town and you show them who you are. Not the mail order bride, not the girl from Boston, the woman who took down a judge and a doctor with a hairpin in a leather journal. Clara held his gaze. All right, she said, Sunday. That night after the cabin was dark and Cordelia was sleeping and Gideon and Ezra had gone to their rooms, Clara found herself on the porch. The night was cold and clear. The stars enormous, the mountain dark and silent around her. She pulled the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders and listened to the nothing. The nothing up here was different from the nothing in Boston. In Boston, nothing was empty. Up here, nothing was full of wind and pine and the distant sound of cattle and the deep old quiet of a place that had existed before people and would exist after them. The door opened behind her. Silas came out. He sat beside her on the step, close, their shoulders not quite touching, the warmth of him in the cold air like a banked fire. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them had changed so many times in 4 days that Clara had lost count. Strangers' silence, adversaries' silence, the silence of two people working side by side, the silence of a man reading to his sleeping mother while a woman watched from the doorway. And now this, whatever this was. You scared, Silas asked. Terrified. Good. Me too. You do not look terrified. I do not look like anything. That is the scar's one advantage. Cannot read a poker face that has already been ruined. Clara laughed softly. The sound surprised them both, small and warm in the cold dark. Clara, yes, when this is over. When Sunday is done and Crane is finished and things are settled. He stared at the darkness. His jaw worked. The words were fighting to get out and he was fighting to let them, and both of them were losing. I want you to stay. Her heart stopped, restarted, forgot its rhythm. Stay where here, on the mountain, with us. He paused. Something moved in his throat. With me. He turned to face her. In the starlight, the scar was invisible, and his eyes were everything. Amber and deep and holding something he had kept locked away for 12 years, and was now for the first time choosing to show to another living person. 4 days ago, I was a dead man walking. I was up here alone watching my mother go blind, waiting for the mountain to swallow me the way it swallowed my brothers. Then you showed up. 110 pounds of Boston girl with a saddlebag full of medicine and a spine made of iron. And you saved her. You saved me. He stopped. He looked at his hands. The hands Clara had bandaged 2 nights ago. The hands that had held his mother while she screamed. The hands that were capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary tenderness and did not know which one to reach for now. I have been in the dark for 12 years, Clara. You are the first light that has come through that door since Sam and Tom died. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She did not wipe them. She let them fall because some things deserve to be felt completely. You do not know me, Silas. Not really. It has been 4 days. I know you ride through darkness when you are afraid. I know you stand in front of guns you have never fired. I know you cry when my mother can see and you think nobody is watching. I know you carry your dead grandmother's journal against your heart like it is sacred. People will talk. The mail-order bride who stayed, let them talk. Let them talk about something worth talking about. Silas, I am not what men usually want. I am not Rosalind Crane. I am not beautiful or connected or wealthy or any of the things that a man like you should want. You are everything. The word came out stripped of all armor, raw and real and frightened in a way that Silas Callahan had never allowed himself to be frightened. You are everything I did not know I was looking for because I was too blind to see it. Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She had a dozen arguments, a dozen reasons this was impossible, impractical, insane. She had known this man for 4 days. She had come here as a transaction. Marriage negotiable. She was not supposed to feel this. She was not supposed to want this. She was supposed to help his mother and figure out her own life and be sensible and careful and safe. She looked at him, the scar, the amber eyes, the man who had learned to read scripture aloud so his mother could hear his voice and not his fear. The man who had fought every instinct he had to let a stranger touch his world. The man who was sitting on a porch step in the cold dark telling a woman he had known for 4 days that she was the first light in 12 years. and meaning it in a way that went so deep it did not have a bottom. "We survived Sunday first," Clara said. And then, yes. He reached over and took her hand, his scarred palm against her small fingers, rough against smooth. The warmth of him spread through her like sunrise coming over a mountain, slow and golden and impossible to stop. They sat on the porch until the cold drove them inside. They sat by the fire until it burned low. They did not speak. They did not need to. The silence between them had changed one final time. It was not lonely anymore. It was full. Sunday morning, Clara dressed in her navy blue traveling dress, the only good dress she owned. She braided her hair tight, pinned the cameo brooch at her throat, and tucked the journal and the ledger into the saddlebag. Cordelia came out of the back room on her own 2 feet. Her eyes were clear, not perfect. The edges still soft, the distance still blurry. But she looked at Clara and smiled with the full force of a woman seeing the world for the first time in 3 months. "I can see the braids in your hair, mountain girl." "Then you can see everything that matters." Silas hitched the wagon. All three brothers wore clean shirts, a sight so rare that Cordelia made them stand in a line while she looked at them with her healed eyes and wept. Silas lifted Clara onto the wagon bench and climbed up beside her. "My woman rides beside me," he said, "not behind." The wagon rolled south toward Ridgewater. The morning air was sharp and clean. The hills rolled gold and brown to the horizon. And Clara sat with the saddlebag in her lap and her knuckles white around the leather strap and thought about what she was about to do. They arrived at 10 minutes past 11. Church had let out. The streets were full. Every soul in town was walking toward the meeting hall beside the courthouse. And every soul stopped dead when they saw the Callahan wagon. Silas drove with his jaw set and his eyes forward. Clara sat beside him. Behind them, Cordelia sat upright in the wagon bed, her eyes open, her gaze moving across the town she had not seen in 3 months. The whispers began before the wagon reached the livery. "Is that Cordelia Callahan? Lord Almighty?" Her eyes are open. "Who is that sitting next to Silas? Is that the mail order girl?" Silas pulled up in front of the meeting hall. He climbed down, walked to Clara's side, and held out his hand. In front of everyone. In front of the whole town that had watched him reject 20 women 5 days ago. Clara took his hand and stepped down. 50 pairs of eyes hit her like stones. Inside the meeting hall was packed. Every bench full, people standing along the walls. At the front behind the speaker's table, Judge Harlan Crane sat in his finest black suit, silver watch chain catching the light. Beside him, Rosalind, rigid in beautiful green eyes, scanning the crowd like a hawk watching for movement. Behind them, Deputy Virgil Barnes and 2 ranch hands built like brick walls. Dr. Phineas Marsh sat in the front row. His fingers drummed on his knee. His eyes kept darting to the door. When Cordelia walked in with clear-seeing eyes, Marsh went the color of old ash. Crane saw it. His hand tightened on the watch chain. One small motion. Clara caught it. Reverend Obadiah Aldridge walked to the front and raised his hands for silence. "Neighbors, thank you for coming. I called this meeting because there are matters affecting this community that can no longer be addressed behind closed doors. I am going to ask Miss Clara Whitmore to speak." A murmur rolled through the room. The mail-order bride, the girl from Boston. What business does she have addressing the citizens of Ridgewater? "This is a town meeting, not a circus," Crane said from his chair. His voice was smooth and commanding, the voice of a man who had owned this room and everyone in it for 20 years. "What business does a mail-order girl have speaking here?" "The business of truth," Judge Aldridge said, "which I believe is still welcome in this hall." Clara stood up. Her legs were shaking. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body wanted to shrink, to disappear, to melt into the floorboards, the way she had melted into the back rooms of Boston for 22 years. She was not a speaker. She was not a leader. She was a seamstress and an herbalist and a woman who had arrived in this town 6 days ago with nothing but a trunk and a journal and a debt to a stranger who had once wiped mud from a little girl's face. She looked at Silas. He nodded once. That was enough. She looked at Gideon. He gave her the slightest incline of his head. She looked at Ezra. He mouthed two words, "You got this." She walked to the front of the room. She set the saddlebag on the table. She turned to face the town of Ridgewater. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched. Rosalind smirked. Someone coughed. Clara stood there with her mouth open and her voice gone and her courage draining out of her like water through cracked clay. Then Cordelia's voice, from the third row, quiet but clear, steady as iron. "Go on, mountain girl. We are listening." Clara breathed. She found her voice. 3 months ago, Cordelia Callahan started losing her sight. Doctor Marsh diagnosed progressive nerve infection and told her sons there was nothing to be done. He said she would be blind by Christmas. She paused. She looked at Marsh. He was staring at the floor. 5 days ago, I arrived in Ridgewater. I brought medicine my grandmother taught me to make. Appalachian folk medicine. Root and bark remedies passed down through generations of mountain families. I treated Cordelia's eyes with golden seal compresses for 3 days. "Mrs. Callahan, will you please stand up?" Cordelia stood. She looked around the room. Her eyes, clear and alive, moved from face to face. "I can see," Cordelia said simply. "I can see every one of you." "That is impossible," Marsh blurted. The nerve was dying. "No herbal remedy can reverse optic nerve damage." "You are right," Dr. Clara said. "No herbal remedy can reverse optic nerve damage, but it can reverse optic nerve poisoning." The room went dead silent. Clara pulled the ledger from the saddlebag and laid it on the table. She opened it. She read the entries aloud. Mercury chloride drops, weekly visits. The payments marked HC, $50 per visit, $750. Then the land acquisition notes, the copper claim, the estimated value, the purchase price, Marsh's 15%, and the two words, widow status. Clara said, looking directly at Crane. "That means the Callahan brothers have to die. You were not just stealing land, Judge Crane. You were planning to murder 3 men and call it an accident. The same way you profited from the mine collapse that killed Samuel and Thomas Callahan 12 years ago." The room erupted. Shouting gasped, chairs scraping against the floor. The sound of a town waking up to something it had been sleeping through for years. But Crane was not finished. He had survived 30 years of frontier politics. He had weathered worse than a girl from Boston with a stolen ledger. "Miss Whitmore," Crane said, rising to his feet. His voice was ice, controlled. The voice of a man playing his last card and playing it well. "Before you continue this performance, perhaps the town should know who you really are." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded letter. Clara's blood went cold. "I received this from a contact in Boston," Crane said. "It is your application to the Callahan brothers advertisement." He read aloud. "I have extensive nursing experience and familiarity with frontier medical practice." He looked at the crowd. "Miss Whitmore has no nursing experience. She has no medical training of any kind. She worked in a seamstress shop in Boston until 6 weeks ago. Her extensive experience consists of a leather journal she inherited from her grandmother." He let the words settle. "She lied her way onto that mountain. She lied her way into the Callahan's home. And now she is lying her way through this meeting." Rosalind leaned forward in her chair, her green eyes bright with triumph. This was her work. Clara could see it. Rosalind had dug up the application. Rosalind had found the contact in Boston. The beautiful daughter scorned turning beauty into a weapon. The crowd's energy shifted. Doubt crept in like cold air under a door. Murmurs, exchanged glances. The fragile bridge Clara had been building cracking under her feet. She stood at the table and felt the ground crumbling. Crane was right. She had exaggerated her qualifications. She had stretched the truth to get on that mountain. And now the truth she had stretched was being used to strangle the truth she had found. She opened her mouth to respond. "Harlan." Cordelia Callahan's voice cut through the hall like a church bell, clear and strong and carrying the weight of 63 years of frontier living and 12 years of silence and 3 months of darkness and 5 days of fire. Cordelia stood. She walked forward, slow, steady on her own 2 feet, with clear eyes that had been blind 5 days ago and were now fixed on Judge Harlan Crane with the focused intensity of a woman who had been waiting for this moment longer than anyone in this room could imagine. I do not care if this girl stretched the truth on a piece of paper. I care that she rode through the dark on a mule to save a stranger. I care that she held my hand while I screamed. I care that she stood in front of a loaded gun to protect me when my own sons were not there to do it. Cordelia stopped in front of the speaker's table. She turned to the room, the school teacher addressing her class one final time. That man put mercury in my eyes and told me it was medicine. She pointed at Marsh. His ledger proves it. That man paid him to do it. She pointed at Crane. The ledger proves that too. She paused. She looked around the room. At the faces of people she had taught to read, people she had nursed through fevers, people who had attended her son's funerals and gone home and said nothing while the man responsible sat in judgment over their town. Samuel was 20 years old, Cordelia said. Thomas was 18. They went down into that mine at 7 in the morning, and by 9 I was a mother of 3 instead of 5. The timbers were rotten. The mine owner knew they were rotten. He sent my boys down anyway because fixing timbers cost money and boys were cheap. 6 months later, that owner sold the mineral rights to Judge Crane. She let the words settle like stones into still water. You profited from my boys' deaths, Harlan, and then you tried to profit from my blindness. And when that was not enough, you were going to kill my remaining sons. She looked at him, her healed, clear-seeing eyes locked onto his. And in them was 12 years of grief and silence and an iron will that no amount of mercury or money or power could break. Clara Whitmore may have stretched a word on a letter, but the truth is in that ledger, in your doctor's handwriting, in your initials beside the payments, and no amount of Boston postmarks is going to make that disappear. The crowd turned. The doubt evaporated like dew in the Texas sun. In its place, fury. The deep, slow, righteous fury of decent people who have just discovered that the man they trusted to uphold the law has been breaking it in their name. Sheriff Mackey stood by the wall. He looked at Crane. He looked at the crowd. He looked at 60 faces waiting to see which side of history he would stand on. Mackey walked to the front of the room. Harlan Crane, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, assault by poison, and suspicion in the deaths of Samuel and Thomas Callahan. Crane lunged for the door. 2 ranchers caught him. He thrashed. He screamed. He called them fools and liars and threatened to have every one of them ruined. Nobody listened. Deputy Virgil Barnes cuffed Marsh without being asked. The doctor slumped in the handcuffs like a puppet with its strings cut, mumbling about debts and pressure and how he never wanted anyone to die. Rosalind Crane stood frozen by her father's empty chair. She looked at Clara with an expression that was equal parts hatred and horror. You, Rosalind whispered, you did this. Clara looked at her. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt tired. Bone deep, mountain deep. The kind of tired that comes after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. No, Miss Crane, your father did this. I just opened the curtains. Silas was beside her then. She had not heard him move. His hand came to rest on her back. Warm, steady, real. Let us go home, Clara. They walked out of the meeting hall into the bright Texas sun. The crowd parted around them. The whispers were different now. Not cruel, not mocking, something else entirely. She saved Cordelia's eyes, rode up the mountain alone in the dark, stood in front of a gun, that little thing from Boston. Lord have mercy. Thaddeus Bowen had the wagon ready. Aldridge was helping Cordelia into the back. Gideon was already on his horse scanning the street, the strategist ensuring the withdrawal was clean. Ezra stood by the wagon, and when Clara approached, he swept off his hat and bowed. A deep, genuine, ridiculous bow that made Cordelia laugh, and Clara's eyes fill with tears she had earned. Silas lifted Clara onto the bench. He climbed up beside him. He took the reins. Clara turned and looked back at Ridgewater one last time, at the town that had ignored her, at the boardwalk where she had waited 3 hours for someone who never came, at the alley behind the courthouse where she had heard the words that changed everything. She did not say goodbye to the town. She said goodbye to the girl who had been afraid, the girl who had lied on an application because she was desperate, the girl who had believed she was not enough. That girl was gone. Ready, Silas asked. Ready. The wagon rolled north, toward the mountain, toward home. They were married on a Tuesday in October, not because Tuesday meant anything, but because Cordelia declared she had waited long enough to see her eldest son happy, and she was not waiting for a weekend. Reverend Aldrich performed the ceremony in the meadow behind the cabin, wildflowers blooming yellow and purple in the autumn sun. Thaddeus Bowen walked Clara down the grassy aisle because she had no father, and Bowen had said he would be honored, and if anyone mentioned that his eyes were wet, he would deny it to his dying day. Cordelia stood in the front row. Her eyes, clear as mountain water, watched every moment with the fierce attention of a woman who would never again take sight for granted. Gideon stood as witness, calm, steady, the anchor he had always been. Ezra stood beside him, grinning so wide it looked like it hurt, because Ezra had known from the moment Clara stood on that porch with a bleeding knee and called their doctor a liar that this was how it would end. Clara wore a blue cotton dress, not silk, not satin, good sturdy fabric that Gideon had ridden to the county seat to buy because Clara refused to enter Mrs. Pemberton's store. It fit her exactly as she was. No corset, no apology. Silas wore a clean white shirt and looked like he would rather wrestle a grizzly bear than stand in front of people. But when Clara walked toward him through the wildflowers, her honey blonde hair catching the October light, his scarred face broke open into something so raw and unguarded that Aldrich had to stop and let the man collect himself. "You look," Silas started. "Do not say beautiful. I will cry, then I will not say it, but I will think it every day for the rest of my life." Aldrich married them. Silas kissed her. Brief and fierce and final. The door closed on everything else. The first snow of winter would come soon, and when it did, everything between them would change in the quiet way that real things change, not with spectacle, but with certainty. Cordelia clapped and said it was about damn time. The seasons turned. Winter came hard to Copper Hollow, but the cabin was warm. Warmer than it had been in 12 years, because it was full now. Full of voices and laughter, and the smell of Clara's herb garden drying in bundles from the rafters. Clara learned to ride that winter. Ezra taught her with infinite patience. She fell 7 times. The 8th time she galloped across the snow-covered meadow with her hair streaming behind her, and Silas stood by the fence and watched and understood for the first time that the word beautiful had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with light. Spring came. Clara planted her garden. Golden seal comfrey, lavender echinacea. The mountain soil was stubborn but rich. Gideon negotiated the railroad contract that spring fair and ironclad, and the Callahan name became the wealthiest in the territory. But the money was Gideon's domain. Silas did not care about money. He cared about the woman who had stepped off a stagecoach with a leather journal and changed everything. The people of Ridgewater started making the long ride up the mountain. They came with sore joints and bad coughs and infected cuts, and Clara treated them all with her grandmother's medicine and charged them whatever they could afford, which was sometimes nothing. She never turned anyone away, not even Mrs. Pemberton, who came one February with a racking cough and could not look Clara in the eye. "I am sorry," Mrs. Pemberton said, "for what I said about you being bought goods, about the strong wind." "I know," Clara said. "Sit down. You will be fine by morning. Crane went to prison. Marsh lost his license and left Texas. Virgil Barnes resigned and moved to Kansas. Rosalind sold everything her father owned and took a train to San Francisco and never looked back. Ezra married a quiet, kind woman from the next county who loved animals as much as he did. They built a cabin on the south edge of the property, close enough to visit for Sunday supper, far enough for a life of their own. Clara had seen it coming long before Ezra did, the way he volunteered to ride the south boundary more often than the rotation required, the way he brought back wildflowers that always ended up in a jar on the windowsill facing the Hargrove property line. "You are not subtle," Ezra, Clara had told him one morning. "I do not know what you mean." Ezra had said, turning red to the roots of his dark blonde hair. Gideon stayed a bachelor, content with his ledger books and his strategies. Cordelia never stopped trying to match him with someone suitable. Gideon endured it with the patience of a man who had survived worse campaigns and responded to every suggestion with the same quiet smile and the same answer. "I will die organized mother." That is more than most men can claim. 20 years passed. The cabin had grown. 2 rooms added for children. A porch Silas built with his own hands, wide enough for rocking chairs and grandchildren, and the long view of the valley that Clara never got tired of watching. One evening in late autumn, the sun painting the hills gold, the cattle lowing in the south pasture, Silas came home and found Clara on the porch. She was sitting in Cordelia's old rocking chair. Her grandmother's journal was open in her lap, the leather cover worn smooth as silk from decades of use. There was silver in her honey blonde hair, now fine threads that caught the evening light. Her hands, once the pale, soft hands of a Boston seamstress, were brown and sure, and knew their way around a garden and a horse and a healing and a life. Beside her, a grandchild was reading aloud from a second journal, a newer one, Clara's own. The child pronounced the herb names carefully, seriously, the way children do when they know they are learning something important. Golden seal, comfrey, echinacea, lavender. In the yard, 3 more grandchildren chased each other through the wildflowers. A wolfhound, the grandson of the original, lay under the porch table, too old to chase but too loyal to leave. Cordelia was gone. 3 years now. She had died in her sleep peacefully, her eyes open, looking at the face of her eldest son one last time. On her headstone, Clara had written, "She saw the light and the light was enough." Silas sat down beside Clara on the porch. His hair had gray at the temples. The scar had faded but still pulled at his mouth. His hands were still calloused, still rough, still the hands of a man who split his own wood and shoed his own horses and fixed his own fences, because that was what a good man did. He took her hand, the same gesture from that night on the porch 20 years ago, his scarred palm against her small fingers. 20 years, and it was not old. It would never be old. "Still reading that journal?" he asked. "Still learning from it, Don." "After 20 years, your grandmother knew things that will take another 50 years for anyone else to figure out. I am still catching up." Silas looked out at the land, their land, the land his brothers had died under and his mother had been blinded for and Clara had ridden through the dark to save. The land that Harlan Crane had tried to steal and could not because a girl from Boston with a mule and a leather journal had stopped him. "I was dead before you came," Silas said quietly. "I was a ghost on a mountain. You were not dead. You were waiting." "What was I waiting for?" Clara leaned into him. His arm went around her. She felt the solid strength of him, the warmth, the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder. 20 years of that heartbeat, 20 years of that warmth, 20 years of silence that was not empty, but full. "Someone stubborn enough to knock on a closed door," she said. Silas laughed, a real laugh, deep and full and free. The laugh of a man who had finally learned that the heaviest hearts carry the most love, and the biggest mountains stand the strongest when the storm comes. Inside the cabin on the windowsill where Cordelia used to sit watching the sunrise with her healed eyes, there was a jar of wildflowers, yellow and purple like the meadow on their wedding day. Beside the jar sat Clara's journal, the second journal, The one she had been writing for 20 years, filling with every remedy she had learned, every patient she had treated, every piece of knowledge Eleanor Whitmore had passed down, and Clara had expanded and tested and proven on a mountain in Texas. The first page read, "For my granddaughters." The medicine came from the mountains. Pass it on. Clara still remembered stepping off that stagecoach into nothing. 40 years later, sitting on the porch Silas had built with his own hands, watching their grandchildren chase each other through the wildflowers, she thought that was the day my life began. And the mountain that had chosen her from the beginning, stood steady and silent and eternal. The way love stands when it is built by hand. This mountain chose you, and the mountain never moved.